Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the Ego Chall Podcast, a Call of Duty esports podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are going to be discussing a completely normal and uneventful grand finals between the Toronto Ultra and Minnesota Rocker. In all seriousness, we're about to talk about the craziest comeback in Call of Duty history, not Call of Duty League history. Literally, I've never seen a more improbable comeback than what we saw this past Sunday at the Stage 5 Major. So, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing well. Ready to talk some Call of Duty as always.
Yeah, let's get right into it. If you're watching on YouTube or watching on Twitch live, you can watch at twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast every Tuesday at 11:30 p.m. Eastern. You can see the bracket we have up. This is the complete bracket. Just a really wild event from the very beginning. You have a lot of upsets and even just some teams overperforming, like the Seattle Surge. We'll get to them right now. Seattle played Paris to start off the event um, in the losers bracket round one matchup. Both these teams were mathematically eliminated from competing at the CDL playoffs in a few weeks, but still trying to compete for money, pride, and just hoping that maybe they can get their stock up for next season when Roster Mania comes around. So Seattle wins this 3-1. I think you picked Seattle, if I'm not mistaken, and I picked Paris because I'm an idiot and I got like 95% of my predictions wrong for this event. What did you think of Seattle's win here?
Yeah, I mean that was just really a no-brainer pick for me, just based off like what we saw from Seattle at the Stage 4 Major, which was our first return to LAN for this tournament. Obviously, we're headed back to LAN. Was the first event with fans back in a long time, so that was good to see. But I was expecting to see Seattle continue to perform well on LAN, especially in this opening matchup against another team that was in the bottom half of the standings alongside them. Um, so yeah, Seattle took care of business. It wasn't exactly a super close series. Paris won the Search and Destroy 6-2. Seattle won all three respawns. They won Raid Hardpoint 250 to 86, so 100-point club, the first map of the tourney. And then they won Apocalypse Hardpoint in map 4, 250 to 112, so not much closer. And the control, Seattle won another control, and it was 3-1. So Seattle took care of business there in the respawns to end Paris' season.
Yeah, Paris exits the Call of Duty League season. They didn't, obviously, we just said they didn't have a shot at making the playoffs, but this kind of event, I mean, just a good showing could help you for next season. And we don't really know what Paris will be like because they completely overhauled their roster from season one to season two. And I would imagine that the roster will be overhauled from season two to season three because they haven't had the results that they would have liked in either season. Although last season they made it to the grand finals of, I think it was the second to last event or something. I know they lost to Dallas in the grand finals. That's what I remember from it. But uh, I know that they at least did well. They just didn't really click it at all this season, and that's kind of disappointing for Mike, you, me, anybody that's on the Paris is winning champs train. It just didn't click this season. But Paris' season's over. Seattle's season continues. They move on to a losers bracket round two. But first, we had New York versus LAG. Unlike the past match, I actually correctly predicted this one. I gave up on LAG. I threw in the towel on their season, and it looks like I was correct in doing that. New York wins this 3-2. LAG, their control is shiitake mushrooms, as my mom would like me to say when speaking. But just completely horrible. They lose 3-2. What'd you think of this?
That says high school. That was really funny. No, but like you said, that was one of those most surprising things. I didn't look into it. I mean, it obviously would have been super easy for me to look at the results article from group play and double check it, but I believe they said on the broadcast during this match that the Gorillas went 0-18 in control rounds in Stage 5, which, I mean, everybody who's watching this should know how control works is the Game 3 mode. You got to play to 3 rounds. First to 3 rounds wins. So they lost 3-0 6 times, 5 times in group play, and 3-0 here at the major to lose 18 consecutive rounds of control in Stage 5. Uh, Again, didn't really look too far into it. They said it on broadcast, I imagine it's true, but that's just an unbelievable stat. And it kind of sums up the Gorilla Stage 5. It was really, they bring in Mental, give him his shot in the Pro League here. And, it's a tough situation all around. It's not like, he was coming into a team that was succeeding or, just gelling and playing super well at the time. He came into a struggling team. And they continued to struggle even after his addition. So it'll be interesting to see what the Gorillas do with their whole team, but Mental in particular moving forward. Maybe they keep him on as like an academy player. We won't know, obviously, till next year. But yeah, this was, again, slightly closer than I expected. Just because, New York circumstances playing with Diamond Con instead of Cleister. I still thought New York was going to win this, but was a little surprised to see it go to a Game 5. But in the end, New York gets the job done here. If we look at the overall KDs, Mental actually had the highest KD for the Gorillas. He went 70 and 71, so 0.99. Nobody was positive on the Gorillas. And then Mac had a 0.99 for the Subliners, and everybody else was above a 1.05. So good win for the Subliners to start their lower bracket run without Cleister.
What did you think of Mental this stage? Because this is obviously a very tough position to be put in. You are on a team that has, at the time, they had very little chance of actually making champs because while they were in ninth place, they were, whatever, 100 points back from eighth place, and it made it very difficult to actually get into the top 8. And this is kind of a trial period. We talked about it when he was announced as Chino's replacement. We were saying, well, you just kind of trying him out to see what he can bring to a team. So how do you rate his performance in the matches that you watched of LAGs? Do you think he has a legitimate future as a CDL player based on, I guess, the limited sample size that we got to see him in?
Yeah, like you said, it's a small sample size, and as I just previously mentioned, it's a tough situation for him to come into. So he didn't, exactly stand out to me. He's from a statistical standpoint, he had a lot of rough series in his limited time here in the Pro League, but yeah, I mean, he's obviously, I don't know the exact number, but he's won a ton of tournaments in Gears of War, so he knows how to shoot a gun. He knows how to, the basics like that, but it's going to be a question of how he adjusts to playing Call of Duty at this level. The difference between Gears being third person, COD being first person. I think he kind of touched on that in like his introductory video. He didn't think that was going to be a huge problem. It's more of like, figuring out the timings, learning the different game modes, stuff like that. I didn't think this was going to be, a case where he just comes in and he's dropping 1.8s right away. I definitely think it's going to be a learning period, and like I kind of alluded to when I was just talking about this match, who knows exactly what happens with Mental. Like, the Gorillas could like what they see in him and decide to re-sign him to the point not to put him on the professional roster, but to keep developing him at the academy level if they think there's potential there. That's definitely the route I think they should go down, just considering like they have this offseason to completely rebuild their 4-man starting roster for the CDL. And if they like keep him and allow him to have another year down in Challengers, continue to develop playing COD at this level, I think that's the move I would go down. But just, like talking performance-wise, I would have to look up the stats for each match. But I know he definitely had some tough matches. And it's to be expected, to be honest. Like he's coming into a situation, as I said multiple times already, that's a little rough, and he's playing some teams that have been together for multiple months at this point. Some of the top teams in the world, and he's just it's gonna be tough for him to fry right off the bat like that. So, um, I don't think it's the debut that he personally wanted. I obviously would have to talk to him to know that for sure. But yeah, I don't think this is the last we see of him. He might get another shot down the road, but I think it's just going to be like a developmental process with him to try and get to this level.
Let's go up to the winners bracket. We had Atlanta FaZe versus Minnesota Rocker. Going in, neither of us picked Minnesota. We thought Atlanta, the back-to-back defending major champions, the number one team in the league. They had already locked up a number one seed at champs. Heading into this stage, I think they had already locked up the number one seed. So this entire stage has been basically, trying out new things, making sure that your map pool is as solid as it can be heading into the most important time of the season. But even coming into this match, we did not expect Minnesota to pull off an upset here. They do that. They win 3-1. And even after they won, I was like, okay, FaZe will just bounce back through the losers bracket, and Minnesota will probably lose in winners round 2 to Dallas because Dallas has been playing really well, and Dallas and Minnesota just played pretty recently, and Minnesota did not win that match. So I was convinced that this was kind of a fluke and that Minnesota would, peter off after this. I mean, we'll talk about that, but Minnesota beats FaZe. This is, I think, the 7th loss or something of the season for FaZe this entire season, and it's like incredible. It's incredible that FaZe would lose to a team like this. Like, no offense to Minnesota, but I didn't have high expectations for them at any point in this season, and they come in and they immediately beat undoubtedly the best team in the world at the moment. What did you think of Rocker's win here?
Yeah, I think the big thing we have to remember that we kind of shrugged it off, and obviously now looking back, we shouldn't have. But if you go back to that last week of group play for Stage 5, Week 3, Minnesota played Florida, who I don't remember exactly who they played, but Florida had been playing well leading up to that point. Minnesota was playing Florida in a match that had implications for the 6th seed to be in winners bracket for champs. And we had that highlighted as like an important match. And Minnesota came out and just dominated 3-0, swept Florida. And we both weren't expecting that. And that obviously should have been our first sign that things were changing with Minnesota and they were improving. And, maybe we shouldn't have obviously jumped the gun with Florida 3-0ing or Minnesota 3-0ing Florida and immediately saying, hey, Minnesota's going to win the Stage 5 major. But obviously that was our first clue that, things might have been changing there. It was a sign of things to come potentially for Minnesota. But as you said, I completely wasn't expecting them to just, beat FaZe here. Good on them for being able to pull it off, but I certainly wasn't expecting it. They were pretty close maps too. It started on checkmate hardpoint 250 to 211 for Minnesota. Then we had a game 2 round 11 on Express. Minnesota run 6-5. Atlanta wins the control 3-0. They've been a really good control team all year. So they forced the game 4 there, but then Minnesota wins raid hardpoint 250 to 205. So close maps. This not counting that control, but all 3 of Minnesota's wins were close. And this was a shocker.
Yeah, when Minnesota beat Florida, that was their final match of group play, and I chalked that up to Florida being inconsistent, and I didn't give the due credit to Minnesota because I thought, all right, Florida, they have the ability to beat some of these top teams, but they also have the ability to not show up and not perform to the way that we think they can. So when I saw that Minnesota sweep, I was like, all right, Florida's just kind of a middle of the road team that can overachieve, but most of the time they're just too inconsistent. And I didn't give the credit to Minnesota, and that's my fault. But like you said, I'm not like even if I gave Minnesota all the credit in the world, and I said Minnesota 3-0 them because Minnesota is just that much of a better team than Florida. I still wouldn't have been able to believe that they would the first match of the entire winners bracket, they would beat the best team in the world, even if FaZe is having an off series. So I was just a really shocking result. But I mean, this major was definitely the most shocking of all of them, from top to bottom. Just a lot of upsets, a lot of weird results. So. I mean, maybe this was just a precursor to what was about to come throughout the entire weekend.
Yep.
And then in the other winners round one match, we had the Toronto Ultra beating the Los Angeles Thieves 3-2 in this series. So Ultra move on to round two in the winners bracket. That's not too much of a surprise to us. We both picked Toronto to move on because, well, LA, they are kind of still finding themselves with this roster. They've had this entire group play to figure it out, but I mean, it takes a lot of time to get the chemistry, and we don't really know what the ceiling is for this team because we hadn't seen John at all in the CDL for a year and a half, nearly two full seasons. So we didn't really know what he could bring to this roster, but they do come close. They lose in Game 5 to Toronto, who coming into this event, I would have probably said that they're second or third in the world. So not a bad result for LAT. What did you think of Toronto's win here?
Yeah, it sums it up pretty well. I was expecting Toronto to win this one, but it was probably a little closer than I thought. The biggest takeaway for me is that the Thieves won both hard points here. Toronto got it done through search and control, which, they've been a good search and control team all year, so it's not too surprising, but I was just a little surprised that the Thieves were able to win both hard points. Um, Other than that, the search, game 2, Moscow search was a 6-0 for Toronto, and then standoff in game 5 was 6-3. So those weren't really close. And the garrison control even was a 3-0. So Toronto took care of business. Might have been a little bit of a longer series than some people expected, but they got the job done. If we look at the stats real quick, Insight, Cammy, and Kleenex all had over a 1.1. For the Thieves, Slasher had a 1.15 overall KD, and all three other players were under a 1. So just some interesting stats there. But again, yeah, it was a good series, a little longer than some people might have expected, but Toronto wins in the end.
On to Friday, July 30th, we had two losers bracket games to start off the day. London versus Seattle and Florida versus New York. Let's start with the least interesting game, or the least interesting match. We had Seattle and London. Again, two teams that were out of contention for playoffs, but Seattle, they continue their run of good land play. They advanced to round 3 with a sweep over London, so ending London's season right there. Any notes on Seattle's win? This is like they have a really good land record compared to their online record.
Yep. And that's the thing. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit. I think at least we plan on talking a little bit about the teams that won't be a chance at the end of our show. But I for some reason the CDL site hasn't been loading. I've been trying to pull up the points, but I'm pretty sure because of Seattle's performance this weekend, they went from last place to ninth place. So they're technically like the best of the teams not at champs. Let's just I mean, they got top 8 last major, I believe, on land, and they get top 6 at this one. So
Yeah.
it just really makes you think what could have been for this team if the whole season was on land, or if they were able to play, maybe even just a couple other tournaments on land. Who really knows? We'll never know. Just makes you think about that. But other than that, the game 1 came down to the wire. I don't remember it for some reason, but I wrote down in the notes that it was a little bit of a wild one, and it was 250 to 247 Seattle. Then after that, Seattle wins Moscow Search 6-2 and Garrison Control 3-2. The thing that I was happy to see, and we talked about it on our last episode of the pod, was even though London loses here and their season comes to an end, Afro still played really well here. We've been talking about him playing well recently, and we wanted to see him to continue to do that at this major. Although it was only, he only got to play 3 maps. He dropped a 1.35 overall KD, which was the highest in the series. He went 66 and 49, which was also the most kills in the series and the fewest deaths. So he certainly played well in a losing effort. It will be interesting to see how London decides to go about their presumed rebuild in the offseason here, but definitely one option that I think would be a no-brainer for them would be to re-sign Afro, try to build around him, see what he's able to do next season. But, again, we can talk about that later. Other than that, simple 3-0 here for Seattle, and they keep on moving on land.
Seattle did improve. They were heading into this event, they were in 12th place with 90 CDL points, which was 10 points fewer than the 9 through 11 teams. So coming into this event, Seattle had 90 points. Paris and LAG and London, they all had 100 points. So they were all kind of tied for ninth. But because Seattle earned 30 points from this performance at the major, they finished the season with 120 points. London, because they lost in round 2 of the losers bracket, they get 10 points. And then LAG and Paris didn't get any points, so they finish in a tie for last or /11th place with 100 points. I'm not sure how the head-to-head works out here. COD Gamepedia has LAG ahead of Paris, but LAG's match record, their match win percentage, is lower than Paris's. But I'm not sure what the head-to-head there is between LAG and Paris. But yeah, either way, they both stink, so that's really all we really need to know. And then Florida and New York, that's the other losers round 2 match. Coming in, I think I did pick Florida because I'm like, well, New York doesn't have their actual roster. They still have Diamond Con here, and Florida, like I said earlier in the show, is capable of doing really well. This is not one of their moments. They lose 3-2 to New York. They exit with a pretty disappointing performance at the Stage 5 Major, especially one that they could have used to improve their seeding for champs. It just doesn't work out. They lose 3-2. What did you think of the Subliners win?
Yeah, you kind of summed up what I was thinking here. I believe I know for a fact I picked Florida to win this one. Just again, a situation where with New York not having Clayster, having this last minute roster, I was expecting Florida to take care of business and move on. But as you mentioned when we were talking about Minnesota earlier with that Minnesota-Florida match, Florida's been inconsistent all the year. And this is another situation, second major in a row, where New York has basically a fill-in roster. It was at Stage 4. They had to use Decimate in place of ASIM. Now at this major, they have Diamond Con in instead of Clay. Second major in a row where New York sends Florida home, if I'm remembering correctly. And you could make the case that Florida was favored in both of those matches because of New York's circumstance. So Florida did jump out to a 2-0 lead in the series. New York ends up completing the reverse sweep. A lot of the maps were very close. Both hard points, it was 250 to over 200. The Game 2 search was 6-4, whereas Game 5 went Game 5 round 11, and the control went to around 5. So it was a really close series. Raises some questions for Florida heading into champs. They're going to be down in that loser bracket and, fighting for their lives right away, just like they were at this major. So they're going to have to hit the drawing board, try to figure out some stuff. I did want to point out, though, that one thing during the Game 1, I was going to go back and watch this, but I forgot. They did a listen-in with Florida where Havoc was just really, being extremely vocal. And he was, basically taking over the comms for Florida. And it got to a point where Maven and Merc were questioning if it was too much. There was a time where Havoc was let's nade this, and he was 1, 2, 3, go. And Maven and Merc were we don't even know if anybody listened to him. He was just like speed calling out, like being really fast, and they were like questioning if it was like too hectic of call outs. I don't know. I would have to go back and listen to it again to see what they were exactly what they were talking about. But I thought it was interesting. If I'm sure you remember, maybe some of our viewers or listeners might, that when Florida initially made this change to bring in Havoc in place of Slack, one of the things I questioned was who was going to be the leader on this team, and it seems like, at least to this point now, Havoc is filling that role. And there were other indications throughout the season that Havoc was kind of, stepping into that spot to try and be a leader for these three young players he has surrounding him. So yeah, we're just gonna have to see what what Florida is able to do heading into champs, if they're able to bounce back from this and make some magic happen in the lower bracket.
Yeah, I think the leadership thing is interesting because, like you said, we talked about who would Havoc be a suitable leadership presence for this kind of team. Like, what were they really looking for in a replacement for Slack? Because everybody kind of just assumed that Slack was the leader, and that, I mean, you have all this talent. You have Skies, you have Awakening. Those are two, like, Skies was an MVP candidate last year. Had Florida been more consistent, Awakening probably is an MVP candidate this year. And it just, I don't know, it's a weird situation for them heading in. I While you were talking, I looked at the standings. Obviously, Minnesota, they overachieved far greater than anything that we expected this weekend. But heading into the major, Minnesota had 230 CDL points. LA Thieves had 210, and Florida had 200. So that was 6, 7, 8. Because Optic was pretty far ahead of Minnesota, there was really no shot for them to jump up to fifth. So they were all just really competing for sixth place, which, sixth place doesn't sound like really much, but sixth place doesn't start in the losers bracket, which is the most important thing. So Florida was only 30 points back from Minnesota heading into this event. Obviously, what we know now, Minnesota just goes on their run. It makes it impossible for Florida to do anything. But, I mean, they didn't really even have a shot at getting seventh place because Florida goes out right here in losers round 2. They only get 10 points for their performance, and LA, because they don't, like, even with their winners round 1 loss, they drop into losers round 3 and they automatically get 20 points. So it's like Florida just didn't show up this weekend, which has been a very concerning trend if you're a Florida fan, that this team at different points in the season, they look really, really good, and then they just don't. And that's, I don't see the reason for why, because at different points we have Havoc that steps up. He had some good games during this series. At certain points we've seen Awakening just completely decimate a entire lobby, and he looks like the greatest player in Call of Duty. Skies has done the same thing. Neptune has even had his moments. I don't see the pattern between when they do poorly and when they do well. I just don't see what makes the difference for them. Do you see the difference, or like how do they find any sort of consistency when they don't even have a loss? Like they can't afford a single loss at champs. So what is it for them that can, I don't know, get them to even like a top 4 finish?
I think that's a good question. Obviously, I think we can go a little bit more in depth in that into our actual champs preview next episode. But real quick, I feel like the key is just going to be, uh, find. It's tough, man. Like even just saying, trying to find that consistency. Like what does that really mean? Like it's kind of just saying like you want to have all your players firing on all cylinders. You can't have somebody lagging behind. And I'm not saying that was the issue in this series in particular. I mean, Havoc had a .91 KD, which is respectable. Everybody else on the team was positive. But I feel like when Florida's at its best, they kind of have to play through Big Wake. He only had a 1.04 in this case in this series, which isn't bad, but I'm saying only because, like you said, we've seen those gigantic, enormous Wake performances where he just absolutely pops off. And maybe that's their win condition for this team. Like they really need to play through him and have him playing up to that next level that we've seen occasionally from him this season. It'll be interesting. I think that could be a good topic, like you said, something we'll talk, or like I said, it'll be something we'll talk about in the champs preview. Um, but I mean, they definitely have the talent. It's just going to be, if they're able to find a way to make it click at this last big one of the year.
Back up to the winners bracket, we had Minnesota versus Dallas. This is a match that has been interesting to watch all throughout the season because even when Dallas was definitively the best, one of the best teams and on paper a much better team than Minnesota, Minnesota always gave them as much as they can handle. I think in the first two matchups that they faced each other, I think Minnesota won both earlier in the season. But I go back to, so they played each other on July 18th in Stage 5. This was Minnesota's second to last group play match. And then, like we said earlier in the show, a week later, they beat Florida in their final group play match. But Dallas versus Minnesota in Stage 5 group play, Dallas wins 3-1. I didn't see much of it. Like I think even, and maybe it was a loser's bracket prediction, or maybe I was just rambling, but I thought on the last show I said that Dallas would probably beat Minnesota no matter what, or something along those lines, and it just I still don't know. Like Minnesota, they come out and they lose. They pull a Toronto essentially. They pull a Stage 3 Toronto, or Stage 2 Toronto, and they lose that first map. They lose hardpoint, and then they're like, all right, that's enough. And then they just finish out the series. They win 3-1. They advance to their first winner bracket finals of the season. What did you think of Minnesota's win here over Dallas?
Yeah, like you said, it's been an interesting matchup between these two teams all year. I obviously I didn't expect to see this match here because I was fully expecting FaZe to beat Rocker, and I was excited for a FaZe versus Dallas showdown rematch of the Stage 4 Grand Finals, which before this was the best Grand Finals of the year. So yeah, I mean, Rocker just pulled off another shocking win here. There's not much to really say. I just certainly wasn't expecting it. Dallas wins Garrison Hardpoint 250 to 170, but after that, Minnesota takes Miami Search 6-4, Raid Control 3-1, and then Check Me Hardpoint 250 to 196. The big keys, stats wise, you had Standy and Prisa both dropping over 90 kills for Minnesota. Standy went 96 and 77 with a 1.25. Prisa 94 and 76 with a 1.24. And then for Dallas, Shotzi had a 1.11 overall, and then Illy and Vivid had a 0.85 as the next highest on the team. So, just looking at the numbers quick, seems like Minnesota outplayed Dallas pretty heavily, and that could have been their path to victory here. Standy played well all week. I mean, obviously Minnesota played well as a team throughout the tournament, but a lot of people were excited about Standy's performance just because he's like that. Yeah, I don't want to say a BZ type player, but I guess that's just like the quickest comparison I can think of right now off the top of my head, where he's just that in your face aggressive sub player, going off making plays. So definitely a big win here for Rocker, and like you said, they get to that winners finals.
Toronto also advances to the winners finals. They defeat Optic in the winners bracket semis with a 3-2 win. Optic, they really were close here. This was a match that I thought Optic would take because I thought, and I think I was wrong about this. I didn't actually even know that fans weren't gonna be there, like the first 2 days or whatever. The full, yeah, I didn't know that, so I don't think it would have really changed the way I felt because even without fans, I thought that Optic would be better than they would ultimately beat Toronto. So this was kind of a surprising result for me, but not an upset by any means. Toronto has been a really great team for most of this year, and it was a really close match. Do you have any thoughts on Toronto's win here?
Yeah, I mean, once again, a little different than Toronto's previous win against the Thieves. Um, just in the sense that they didn't win the control, but uh, once again, we see Toronto win both searches at this major to secure a victory. And like I alluded to earlier, its search and control has been something that Toronto has been good at all year. Obviously, there was that period. I think it was stage three. Obviously, they won stage two major, but stage three group play, they won a lot of maps in a row, and they were playing well in all the game modes. But their search and control has really been what stood out to me for Toronto since bringing Insight into the lineup. So they win again here through the searches, and they get that win over Optic. I'm pretty sure I picked Toronto to win this one, and you picked Optic. But regardless, it was a good match. Optic, wins a nail biter, 250, 238, map one. Toronto wins the search. Optic wins the raid control 3-2, which was a back and forth one in the sense Optic went up 2-0. Then it looked like Toronto gained the momentum. They forced that round 5, but Optic makes a comeback in round 5. I can't remember who. I think Insight or somebody might have got streaks during in round 5, and Optic was still able to pull off the win in the control. So that was kind of interesting. And then Toronto just dominates Garrison Hardpoint 250 to 134 and carries that momentum into Express Search to win 6-2.
On Saturday, July 31st, we had a 5-match day, so a little more than we're used to. In the first match, we had LAT versus New York in the losers round 3 matchup. New York was coming off 2 consecutive wins. LAT coming off of their loss against Toronto. But the Thieves end up winning 3-1. I mean, I think if you would have told New York fans that they would go out at this point in the tournament without Clayster and really without a lot of consistency in your roster for the last few weeks, I think you would take it. I mean, they haven't had a lot of consistency even with Clayster before he decided to step away at the end of stage 5. So I think getting to losers round 3 would probably be considered somewhat of success, maybe a moral victory. Do you have any thoughts on LA's win over New York here?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly, I think we both said we picked Florida to beat New York in that previous matchup, so obviously we didn't see this one coming, but it was certainly, with New York pulling off that win over Florida and not having us expecting them to be in this matchup with the Thieves, this matchup was closer than, some people might have expected, just in that sense that, didn't even think they were going to be here, but, New York made Florida work New York made the Thieves work for this win. If we look at the scores, it's kind of similar to that Minnesota Atlanta series in the sense that all of the maps that the Thieves won were really close. Similar to Atlanta winning that control in the Minnesota series 3-0. New York wins the control in this series 3-0. But other than that, map 1, Checkmate Hardpoint was 250 to 234 for the Thieves. Standoff Search was 6-5 for the Thieves. I believe that was New York's first loss on Standoff S&D in Stage 5, or maybe even up to this point since Standoff was added to the rotation. I can't remember the exact stat from the broadcast. So obviously, round 11, that was close. And then Apocalypse Hardpoint was 250 to 244 for the Thieves. And that was a one where the Thieves had, it looked like the Thieves were going to take, a simple win on Apocalypse and cruise to the 3-1 series victory, but New York fought back, made a really impressive comeback. It came down to a really scrappy battle on that middle P1 hardpoint on Apocalypse where the Thieves were at 247, so only a couple seconds away from winning, and New York just kept contesting and getting them off the point and building their lead slowly, but then Thieves got the kills and got the last few seconds to close it out. But, like I said, New York really made the Thieves work for it, and, who knows, maybe we still don't know the status of New York heading into champs, whether we'll see Clayster or not, but if this is the New York lineup we see at Champs and they're able to put some work in over the next couple weeks before that tournament starts, New York could be a team that causes some trouble, pulls off some upsets. Real quick, too, the most impressive thing from this series, Hydra drops a 1.54 overall KD. It was 103 and 67. The next closest for kills was ASIM at 83. The highest for kills on the Thieves was 78. So Hydra just had a phenomenal series, even though New York loses in the end. But yeah, like I said, this was an interesting one. Definitely hard fought win for the Thieves. And New York made them work for it, even though their tournament run came to an end here.
Then we get the biggest surprise of the event in terms of, I guess, just the teams stacking up against each other. And I wouldn't say it's the most surprising result because that would be the grand finals still. But between the first place team coming into this event and the last place team coming into this event, we had the Seattle Surge and Atlanta FaZe in losers round 3. Neither of us expected Atlanta to even be in this position coming in, but they're here. And then they still lose to Seattle, who, I mean, they've had success on LAN. They've won to this point that I think they had won 4 matches on LAN, and that was more than they had won online the entire season. So that was impressive, but I did not expect a win here for Seattle, but they pull it off. They win 3-2. They obviously advance to losers round 4, which is the furthest that they've gotten in any major this season. They eliminate FaZe, who to this point had not even fallen short of a grand final this season. They had won 3 of the 4 previous majors, and in the Stage 2 major, they at least got to the grand finals and lost to Toronto. So this is a very shocking result. Seattle winning and eliminating FaZe. I mean, I don't want to ask, like, are you stunned by this? Because that's really just obvious. But I guess why, like, if you had to point to one thing, what would the reason be for FaZe losing here to Seattle?
I mean, the biggest thing that stands out, obviously we would have to dissect each map to, break that down. But, just looking at the scores simply, Seattle won both hard points here. And that's kind of surprising for a team of FaZe's caliber. Let me just scroll back to that Minnesota series, I believe, because Atlanta only won the control. So that means Atlanta went 0-4 in hardpoint at this major, which is just super surprising for a team. Atlanta's still the best team in the world in my eyes. They had an off event. They struggled. Whatever you want to chalk that up to. Just didn't work out for them here. But to lose to a team like Seattle here, where they lose both hard points, I mean, you don't even think Atlanta lets it get to a Game 5 scenario. And then for Seattle to clutch up in that Game 5, that's surprising too, because Atlanta's search has been really strong lately. So I think this is just, a big win for Seattle in the sense, obviously nobody was expecting it, but they were playing with nothing to lose, right? Like this is basically chance for them. Their last tournament. If they lose, their season's over. If they win, they get to keep playing COD on LAN. So, they obviously had the fire and were able to get the job done. Let me pull up these stats. Or is this the stats? These are stats. Yeah, I mean, the big thing, too, from a statistical standpoint, the only 2 players who had a positive KD in this series, Classic had a 1.14, led the entire series here, went 104 and 91. That's, something you probably don't expect. All 4 players on Seattle at least had a 0.9, though. And then for FaZe, Cell had a 1.13, Abizi had a 1.0, and then RCDs had a 0.96 and Simp had a 0.94. So it was a really close series from a slaying perspective where you had nobody dropping below 0.9. It was just obviously with Seattle winning, it was not what people expected, but from a number standpoint, there it was a hard fought battle, even in a loss for even in a loss for Atlanta. Sorry.
So you're not concerned at all about Atlanta. I know they have a few weeks off until champs, and they still have the advantages of being the number one seed and having that first round bye and starting in the winners bracket, obviously. So you don't have any concerns about this team going into the final event of the season.
I definitely have some concerns, but I how do I want to word this? Well, they have that bracket advantage, and they still are the best team in my eyes. And if obviously, we've seen this before where Atlanta is willing to put in the work and the time to figure stuff out when stuff isn't going their way. The best example I can think of is when they were struggling in search, they immediately bring in Tupac to fix that mode, get things going again for them. So with them struggling in hardpoint, maybe they, lock in on that mode, try to figure out what went wrong at this major. And that's what I think just Atlanta has a really strong coaching staff and support staff there. They're going to do whatever they can over these next couple of weeks to try to get back to the form we've seen Atlanta in all year. So obviously, this wasn't what I was expecting, and it's certainly shocking to see them go out like this. But I still think at the end of the day, if Atlanta puts in that time and the work as I expect them and many people expect them to do over these next couple of weeks, that they'll show up at champs and at least be better than what we saw at this event, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Let's stay in the losers bracket. We got losers round 4 matches between the Dallas Empire and the Los Angeles Thieves, as well as the Optic Chicago versus Seattle Surge matchup. Let's start with that Dallas LAT match. Dallas is coming in off of their loss to Minnesota. LAT coming in off of a win earlier in the day over the New York Subliners. Dallas wins this 3-1. They advance to the losers semifinals. I guess, were you expecting this based off of how Dallas looked in winners round 2 and how LAT looked in their previous 2 matches?
What was I expecting Dallas to win?
Yeah, were you expecting this result coming in after, because Dallas lost to Minnesota, and I mean at this point you could say like Minnesota has looked so good because they beat FaZe and then beat Dallas that it's not that surprising that Dallas would lose to a team that could beat FaZe. But were you expecting Dallas to beat LAT?
Yeah, I was definitely expecting Dallas to win this one. I think this series kind of like flew under the radar a little bit, just in the sense that it was following up that absolute banger between Atlanta and Seattle. So I don't know. I feel like the Thieves came out and they win that map 1. Checkmate hardpoint 250 to 187, and that's just something we've seen multiple times down in the losers bracket, right? Like the Thieves had just played a match earlier in the day against New York, whereas Dallas hadn't played an actual match on stage yet. So the Thieves kind of have an advantage. It's not like in on Sunday where the loser bracket team immediately goes into the grand finals and plays the next series, but they still had more recently played on stage. So the Thieves are able to do whatever you will with that. Thieves come out, win map 1, but after that Dallas takes control of the series. It was close though. 6-5 on Miami. I think Shotzi had a technical 1v3 if I'm remembering it correctly. He got like 2 kills and then defused. I can picture it in my head, but I don't remember exactly what happened. But either way, they win that 6-5. Garrison controls 3-2, and then Moscow hardpoint was 250 to 234. So it was definitely a close series. But we saw last major what Dallas was capable of on LAN with this roster, so I was expecting this result, and they get the job done to keep on playing.
Then we had Optic versus Seattle. Seattle coming in off of an absolute incredible upset over Atlanta. Whatever, like an hour and a half, 2 hours before this match. and then they play Optic. They win game one hard point over Optic, which if you beat Optic in a hard point, I mean, I don't know what the odds are, but Optic is notoriously a fantastic respawn team. Like throughout their history, just this incredible respawn team that traditionally struggles in search. Like if there is a weakness, it's their search. And in this case, they lose hardpoint Optic. They lose hardpoint. They win search and control, and then Seattle gets them back. They win hardpoint, and then Optic ends up clutching up. They win Game 5 S&D. They eliminate Seattle, who to this point, the most impressive losers bracket. I mean, this is the most impressive major that they've had. This is one of the most impressive loser bracket runs of any team this season. Optic and LAT are some of the other teams that also had some impressive runs. But what do you think of this series between Optic and Seattle?
Yeah, I think I kind of just touched on it in the previous one where, Seattle is coming off that huge win over Atlanta, and they played more recently on stage than Optic, so they're able to get the job done in map 1. Optic wins the raid search 6-5. They take the control 3-0. But then Seattle, man, they just keep playing really well on hardpoint. So I think that means they went 4-0 on the day in hardpoint because they won 2-0 against Atlanta. Yeah, so they were 4-0 on the day in hardpoint. But then when it comes down to it at the end there, Optic just closed out in Game 5 to end Seattle's Cinderella run. And speaking of run, I gotta run to the bathroom really quick, so you just solo this as long as you can. I will be back.
All right. So so you can go. I'll solo this. But Seattle, we switched spots, so don't be concerned. For this, I just think Seattle's run is actually even more impressive when you consider that they were just simply incredible in hardpoint at this event. Against Paris, they won both hardpoints. Against London, they won the first hardpoint. They only went 3 games in that series. And then when they get to the Atlanta series, they win both hardpoints. And in this series against Optic, they win both hardpoints. So by my math, 7-0 in hardpoints in their entire event. Just an incredible run for Seattle, especially from a team that, I mean, they struggled really, really. They had a tough time throughout this entire season, which is, I mean, you kind of expect it. They're one of the last place teams throughout the entire season, so you would also expect them to struggle in hardpoint, which is, probably the second most important game mode for a team. I guess someone can make an argument that it's the most important considering that can set the tone for an entire series, but very impressive from Seattle that they were even able to do this. They go out here. This is, I believe, a top 6 finish for them, but considering they, basically didn't get past like top 10 for most of the season because they would get instantly knocked out, or top 9 or whatever. They would get instantly knocked out in the major. I think they have, out of any team in the bottom 4, they have the most compelling argument for why champs should have been inclusive to include every team, not just the top 8 teams. I'm not sure. My stance has really stayed the same for most of the season, and especially later in the season since we didn't see really any change or significant change in the standings, at least. The bottom 4 were basically, I don't know, they were pretty stationary in all honesty. Seattle didn't really make too much of a move, and I don't know how long that the bottom 4 have been in the bottom 4 right now. So that's Paris, London, Seattle, and LAG. I don't know how long they've all been in the bottom 4, but I would have to imagine it's been a few months because LAG, they didn't win any matches in stage 5 at all. Paris, they did win a few matches in Stage 5, but it didn't really get them anywhere. And I mean, there's been a sizable gap between top 8 and that ninth spot for quite a while now. So um, I think if any team has an argument for why they deserve to go to champs, I think it's Seattle, just with the way they played at LAN. Although I think it was never going to happen because the CDL was, in my opinion, super dead set on just bringing the top 8 teams to LA, especially since it's not online this year, so they're actually going to fly them out. And I think the plan all along last season before the pandemic happened, and then that changed the way the season was played. Their plan all along was to bring the top 8 teams. It was never to allow all 12 teams to compete at champs, but like we saw last season, there were concessions made, which was, I think, the right decision. But in this case, I think, I don't know, I see Seattle's case for why they should have gotten into champs. How they, if anything, their case was emboldened by their play on LAN. They got I don't know, top 8 or whatever at the Stage 4 major, and then at the Stage 5 major get top 6 and beat the best team in the world and nearly beat Optic, who is at the very least the top 5 team in the world. So a very interesting, and I think it's a compelling argument, but it kind of falls on deaf ears because the CDL was dead set on making this a top 8 event. Bink is back, and let's just move on to, we're almost done with Saturday's matches. We have one more match on Saturday. We had the winners bracket finals between the Minnesota Rocker and the Toronto Ultra. The Battle of the North, I guess this has been a rivalry, a rivalry. There is no real rivalries in COD between teams, in my opinion. But Toronto and Rocker, they play here in the winners finals. And Minnesota, they end up sweeping the Ultra, which is, they just, I mean, I don't think it's as impressive as beating FaZe outright, but this is an incredible performance to beat FaZe to start off the event, then to beat Empire, and then to beat Ultra in 3 consecutive matches. So Minnesota moves on to the grand finals, their first their first major grand finals of the entire season. Bink, what do you think of Minnesota's win over Toronto?
Yeah, sorry for the interruption there. Hopefully you weren't too stressed out doing solo pod. But this was obviously, in my opinion, another shocking result, and I can't say it was the most shocking result of this day because we had that Seattle FaZe upset, but this was certainly a shocker. And I think, just from a score standpoint, it was the only 3-0 of the day, so that was kind of surprising. And it might have even been the least exciting series from that regard, just because, Minnesota just came out and continued to look like a really strong team. They win Check Me Hardpoint 250 to 225. They win Raid Search 6-4, which I wrote down. I believe the broadcast said it was Toronto's 3rd loss of the year on Raid Search. And we were just talking on the pod, too, about how Toronto had won those previous series in the upper bracket by winning their searches. So obviously they don't win the search here. And then Minnesota closes it out on Garrison Control 3-1. So just another impressive performance for Minnesota at this event, showing that, at this point they have now beaten FaZe, Dallas, and Toronto, which are 3 of the top 5 teams in the league, whichever way you look at it. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
So just, impressive run there from Minnesota. If we look at the stats, Toronto noticeably struggled in the slaying department, with Cammy having a 1.24 KD, and then Insight Pants and Kleenex were all negative. Whereas for Minnesota, Attach had a 1.3, Major Maniac had a 1.23, and Sandy had a 1.13 overall KD.
Yeah, I think there's a real good case that heading into this event, FaZe, Empire, and Optic were the best teams, or not Optic. FaZe, Empire, and Ultra were the three best teams in the league, and then you could make the case that Optic was better than possibly Toronto or Dallas. But either way, they beat three of the top four teams in the league to this point in consecutive matches. They didn't go to Game 5 in any of those series, which is even more impressive. So, and let's move on to Sunday. We had three matches on Sunday. We had loser semis, loser finals, and then the grand finals. Minnesota, they're awaiting whoever was going to play them. That we start off the day with E Clasico, Dallas versus Optic, and Optic ends up winning this. They eliminate the Empire with a 3-1 victory here. I thought the checkmate control was insane. Uh, I wish that the round 5 would have been a little more interesting, but Dallas ends up winning a round on offense in which the clock literally said 0.0, and everybody's trying to scramble to see who can finish off. Maybe Optic can just push them off the point for, I don't know, like zero point 0.2 seconds, and then the round ends. But Dallas ends up. I think they get the kills, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember, to be honest, if they ended up completing the point or if it was a kill situation. But either way, Dallas. I mean, if Dallas had won that map and went up 2-1 in the series, all hell would have broke loose on Twitter. Like, everybody would have been complaining to, Vonderhaar and, like, whoever the devs are that people complain to nowadays. But the CDL would have gotten a lot of flack. But I guess fortunately for the CDL, Optic wins that round 5. They win control, and then they end up closing it out on hardpoint to finish the series. What did you think of Optic's win here and them advancing to the losers finals?
Yeah, just real quick, you remember, I'm sure you do, but we've seen issues in control before. Most notably, I'm thinking of in Black Ops 4 where we had the Birmingham event where I think it was Luminosity and FaZe where like Slack slid in on C side, and like it was that situation where like they were going back and forth about uh who should have won the round or whatnot, and like it started the chant with Tommy like LG shit
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah, that just like reminded me of that. It was another situation where we just saw, something you never thought you'd see. So aside from that though, this was a good series. I was personally expecting Dallas to win this one, but when I made those predictions, obviously it wasn't under the assumption that actually, no, it was because I had Atlanta beating Dallas and Toronto beating Optic. So I guess it would have been both of these teams coming off losses there. Uh, but regardless, I just think, Optic was firing on all cylinders here. Envoy had a really good series, notably. He went 170 for a 1.43 KD. Scump had a 1.0. Everybody else was above that. And then for Dallas, Vivid had a 0.99, and everybody else was below that. So this is just, looking at the scores, a typical Optic organization win where they lose the search but win the respawns to seal the deal.
And then we have the losers finals between Toronto and Optic. So Optic, they play back-to-back matches, and you would expect Toronto, they hadn't played at all during the day. They had, practiced or whatever. But Optic coming in off of a win, a little momentum, and they still aren't able to win that opening hard point, which to me was like, okay, like Toronto, if they can pull off a win when they're kind of completely stopping Optic's momentum and they're winning a hard point, from there I was pretty confident that Toronto was going to win. Optic does try to make it interesting. They win a map, but Toronto wins this 3-1, and they eliminate Optic with a top 3 finish. I guess just what do you think of this series as a whole, and maybe a little bit about Optic's performance, since they they did lose to Toronto in the winners final or in the winners bracket as well. So their both of their losses this event were to Toronto.
Yeah. So as I just mentioned, uh, unlike the Optic Dallas series, where Optic get that traditional Optic hardpoint or respawn series victory, they get that done to them here by Toronto, where the Optic only wins the search. Toronto wins all the respawns to move on. But aside from that, to touch on your last question, this was Optic's best placing uh, of the season. I'll look real quick. I'm pretty sure before that they had only placed fourth though at a major this year, so it's definitely a sign of improvement for them. Obviously, this was a good stage for them, where they played well in group play. Were able to get that number 1 overall seed to try and ease the process for them in the winners bracket a little bit. But yeah, they came in fourth at the stage 4 major, fourth at the stage 3 major, top 6 at the stage 2 major, which I'm pretty sure stage 2 major was where they had that accuracy round 11 situation. And they came in fourth at the stage 1 major. So this was their best placing of the year, and it's a good time to have your best placing heading into champs. So another team, I expect Optic to continue to put the work in, try to improve ahead of champs. And obviously, kind of like you touched on with that first Optic Toronto match, where the fans weren't in the stadium for that event yet. The fans were there for this matchup. They were hyped up. Obviously, Greenwall was in full effect following that win over Dallas, and Toronto was still able to come out with the win. So it'll be interesting to see what Optic does during this downtime before champs, what they're able to work on and improve. But heading into champs, they got to feel good about the position they're in the sense that the only team they lost to at this tournament was Toronto. So if they're able to work on some stuff over this down period, they could be in a good position to build off this best finish of the season so far.
And that does it for the major. We don't need to talk about this grand finals, right? There's nothing important or anything that might have happened. I mean, what is there to really say about the biggest comeback in Call of Duty history? Like, I mean, no words can really put it into perspective. Like, coming into this, I filled out Mike's pick'em. I think at like 1 a.m. before this, and I said that the winner of Toronto Optic, which I believe I said it was going to be Toronto, if I'm not mistaken, but I said that they would win the grand finals against Minnesota, and I didn't really think that was I didn't even think it was gonna be real close. And in my defense, for the first 4 maps, I was spot on. Like, if they stopped playing, if this was a best of 7, I would have looked like a genius. Unfortunately for me and Toronto fans and the Ultra players that are now going to have to live this down, this was a best of 9. So you had to win 5 maps. Maybe Toronto, I think what Toronto's problem was, they didn't know that. I mean, like, they use meters and everything. We use, like, feet. Like, maybe they got it mixed up. Maybe they were like, this was a best of 7 and they only had to get to 4. But in the end, they completely dominate Minnesota in the first 3 maps. That checkmate hardpoint was one of the most one-sided hardpoints all of the season. They win 250 to 34. And at that point, people are like, this is BS. Toronto has this unfair advantage over Minnesota because, we've talked about it literally every stage, a stage major, that the team starting in the loser's bracket or coming from the loser's bracket, they are at least playing before this match, where Minnesota's coming in and, they're, quote, cold, and they're practicing against Brian Saint and their coaching staff, and if they can get a scrim against another team, like hopefully they can practice like that, but they don't get the preparation and like warm up that a team like Toronto did. They just played 4 maps against Optic, who is one of the best teams in the world. So Toronto comes in, completely demolishes them on checkmate hardpoint. Moscow search and destroy 6-1, not even close. A raid control 3-1. Toronto is just cruising. And then map 4, I mean, at least it's not a 50-point club situation. Minnesota, they get 194 points on the board, but they go down 0-4. And people are like, all right, it's over. Like, turn off the stream. It's over. I mean, we were probably wrong about that. And, Minnesota just keeps climbing back. They win Miami Search. They win Garrison Control. And I think when they won Standoff Search, people were like, okay, like maybe I should tune back in. Maybe I should see what's happening here. Because, none of those 3 maps were particularly, like contested. They weren't like, nail biters or anything. And then Minnesota absolutely crushes Toronto or not crushes, but they handedly won APOC hardpoint. And then, we're going into map 9. People are watching, saying like, okay, like we have Full Sail, which is obviously winning a map after going down 0-5 in search. I don't know what the other biggest comebacks in COD history are. Like, I mean, you've been watching COD and playing COD a lot longer. I can't think of one. Like, I can't think of another big comeback. Like, there's obviously reverse sweeps. They happen all the time. So, I mean, they're not, like, uncommon in the slightest. But I can't think of another instance where a team completely looks done and then they win a series like this. And Minnesota wins raid, search and destroy 6-3. They pull off the greatest comeback in Call of Duty history. Maybe this might be the most eventful grand finals in Call of Duty history, just based off of like the historic value. I mean, Insight, he did his best. Like, if anything, he can look at it and be like, maybe Cammy shouldn't be an MVP candidate. Maybe they should have gave it to me. He had a 1.44 KD and they lost. Nobody else on his team had over a 1 KD. Only Attach on Minnesota had over a 1 KD. He had a 1.44. I mean, the tissue is an issue, but I don't know, like, rhyme something with Insight, people. Like, make him a bigger deal, because that's incredible, and they still lost. Give me your thoughts. Give me what was happening in the mind of Justin Binkowski when you're watching Toronto absolutely collapse in the grand finals of the Stage 5 Major.
I mean, you did a spot-on job going through that pretty quickly. It was a good summary. But yeah, just that biggest thing, like you kind of touched on, starting with map 1 right away. No winner's bracket advantage for the Rocker. Toronto's coming off that match playing against Optic, and they just absolutely dominate that checkmate hard point. And to the point you were saying, like playing the coaching staff or whatever, I think this wasn't as big of an issue online as it was on LAN. Obviously, there's still questions about the format, what they could do differently, all that. But when we're playing online, a team like Minnesota could just set up a scrim with, another team online.
Even an AM team.
Yeah, even an amateur team. But on LAN, they were like the only other team still in the venue other than Toronto at that point is Optic, who had just lost. So unless like Dallas stuck around after losing to Optic, who was Minnesota going to play? Because like those were the only 4 teams in the venue that day, period. So unless like they somehow got a team to come in to one of the LAN rooms at the stadium and practice scrim ahead of this grand finals, that's just like that's a tough situation for Minnesota. So it really makes sense once you sit down and think about that. Like that was really disadvantageous for the Rocker to have to play Toronto coming off that, coming off a series on stage, immediately having to play them. And that kind of explains, like, I don't want to take anything away from Toronto's performance in the map. Obviously, they popped off and played really well. But that kind of, makes sense once you sit down and critically think about what was going on ahead of time. But yeah, I don't really have to go through this map by map because you pretty much did that. But, definitely agree with you in the sense that once it got to 4-0 Toronto, I was sitting back and I was like, this is done. Like, I didn't think Minnesota had any chance, to be honest. I was, I'm still pretty surprised they were able to actually pull it off. But just map by map. I didn't actually watch it yet. I probably will watch it before I go to bed tonight. But I think the Rocker put out a video of their comms like during this grand final series on YouTube. So I'm gonna check that out, and you guys listening or watching, you should probably check that out too, because I'm sure it'll have some juicy stuff and be an interesting listen. Either way, but yeah, like you said, this is definitely the greatest comeback in Call of Duty history that I can think of. Just in the sense too that not only were they down 4-0, but they had to win 3 searches to win like those last 5 maps. And like you think about it, like when we had the best of 7s in Black Ops 3, there might have been three searches in those, but that was in BO3 we had capture the flag and uplink. So I'm trying to think if there actually was 3 searches in those. Either way though, like just winning 3 searches when you're a map away from losing the entire tournament, that's really sticks out to me. And I wrote down that Kleenex in particular didn't play well once Toronto had that 4-0 advantage. I believe I have the screenshots. Yeah, so on map 5, Miami Surge Kleenex dropped a donut and he went 0-7. And that was kind of Standy went 12-4. That was the start of him just starting to pop off. But then we also had in map 7 where Minnesota wins their second straight search of this grand finals on standoff. Kleenex also struggled and went 2-7. So that was just one thing in particular. Obviously I really like Kleenex as a player. He's super entertaining to watch. But that was just something that stuck out to me, was like Toronto had that opportunity to close out the series in some of those maps before it got, later. And Kleenex in particular struggled statistically when it mattered there. So that was just something that stuck out to me. Obviously, I don't want to put, any blame or anything on that. It's obviously a very tough situation. I'm sure, Toronto guys are going to be kicking themselves enough. They don't need to hear anything from me. But yeah, I mean, just the way Rocker pulled this off, it was really impressive. All kudos to them for able to stay composed while facing such a large deficit. Winning 5 straight maps is tough enough as it is, but to win 5 straight maps while being down 0-4 in the series and being 1 map away from losing the whole thing, it was really impressive. And obviously we're going to talk more about champs in our next episode of the podcast, but I'll be interested to see what you think about Minnesota heading into champs, because they're going to have a target on their back now. They took down some top teams, and obviously they played a lot of maps at this major, so there's going to be a lot of VOD for teams to watch of them. Maybe some teams are able to pick up on some things they were doing to help them succeed. It'll be interesting to see how Minnesota is able to use this performance of the Stage 5 major and if they're able to carry it over to champs.
Yeah, that's what your point about just staying composed, that was what I was going to point out too, because to go down 0-4, that's one thing. Like teams get swept all the time. Like that's not anything. Even to lose 5-0, you have a bad series, and people were already giving them excuses on Twitter. They were saying, well, they didn't have this warm-up, and Toronto had a great warm-up against Optics, so everybody could, all the intelligent people, the people that have brains and don't just like spew hate on Twitter, they can think logically and say, okay, there is a legitimate reason for why they performed so poorly if they got 5-0'd. But when you're down 0-4 and you still don't give up and you continue, even when you're down 4-1, 4-1 still sucks because you still can't really see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I would say even at 4-2, you're like, all right, like, we can win this, but we still have to win 3 straight maps, which in COD, like, that is a full reverse sweep. So like or in most like series. So for them, I mean, just the presence of mind, the adversity that they faced going down 0-4 and, continuing to fight. And they didn't just fight, they really, like, they commanded the back half of the series. Like, in every search, it didn't go past round 9. So they never went to round 10 and 11. In the control, they didn't go to round 5. And at hard point, they won the hard point by over 80 points. So it wasn't really that close in the back 5 maps of the series. And, on the front 4, it wasn't really close either. They got, they weren't even really competitive other than that, 56-point win for Toronto on Raid Hardpoint. So, like, it wasn't really close heading in. So just, I mean, it's obviously the greatest comeback in Call of Duty history, bar none. Like, we've never seen it before. We've seen longer series before because, off the top of my head, Champs 2013, that was a best of 11. And, but, Frico didn't come back from being down 0-5. That would be incredible, but they didn't have to, face that adversity. So, I can't really think of anything that even comes close to this because Full Sail is just one map. That it, I don't know how many times it's actually happened where a team has come back 0-5 in a search and won 6-5. I'm not sure, in the pro scene how often that's happened. Obviously not a lot because, we still talk about it happening the first time and the importance of that, but just an incredible comeback. I wasn't a real big fan of Maven's nickname for this, calling it the Minnesota Massacre, because that seems like really dark and like you could really see it not being that. Like the Minneapolis Miracle is a really big thing for Vikings fans, and that like elicits joy. I don't know if you would want to be talking about the Minnesota Massacre in this sense, and I was trying to come up with a better name. I've been brainstorming since I saw his call for it, but I really can't. Like I'm not good at alliteration, I guess, so I can't figure out what would go well with it. I was just gonna go with the Minnesota Miracle because technically it's different than the Minneapolis Miracle, but yeah, it's a great comeback nonetheless.
Yeah, I think just real quick, I was trying to think earlier about some other comebacks to compare. I still think this is the greatest comeback in competitive Call of Duty history, regardless. The one that sticks out to me is when FaZe, obviously Attach, was on the team again in World War II, where they won against Optic in like the Pro League playoffs or whatever it was when Attach ran through his artillery. But I can't remember if when he ran through that artillery, if that was like game 5 of the first series or game 2. I can't remember exactly what it was. I would have to go back and look. But I know they won 2 series to beat Optic in that one. So I'm not going to call that a comeback. That's just something that came to mind. The other one, which you mentioned, was at COD Champs 2013 with Farico and Envy. I was going to mention the best of 11 for those who aren't longtime competitive Call of Duty viewers or fans. Back in the day, they did used to do best of 11 series, but they were continuation series. So the example here at COD Champs 2013, Envy beats Farico 3-2 in the winners bracket finals, I believe it was. And then Farico gets back to the grand finals, and that's the matchup as a best of 11. So it was a best of 5, becomes a best of 11 in the grand finals with Envy up 3-2. So technically, Puerto Rico comes back from a 3-2 deficit to win 6-5. But again, that doesn't compare to coming back from down 0-4 to win a best of 9, in my opinion. So that was just something I was gonna bring up there too. I also don't have a good nickname. I saw some stuff. I think I saw like an ultra reverse sweep or something. I guess that could be a play on words with Toronto. I don't really know how I feel about it though. But we were mentioning how Optic in Atlanta series doesn't have a nickname. So maybe we have some homework over the offseason to try to think of some good nicknames for, matchups and this feat here. But I do want to say real quick too, just like I was saying, interested to see what Minnesota brings to the table at champs. I am excited to see how Toronto responds to this, because obviously this is just a devastating loss to them. There's no way else to put it. But they're still a really good team, and I think that they have that. They finish in second in the overall standing, so them and FaZe have a bye into winners round 2 at champs. So they're in a good position at champs bracket wise, regardless of this loss. It's just going to be a question of if they're able to, flip that switch, put this behind them, move on, and focus on the goal at hand at champs. So as much as I'm excited to see if Minnesota is able to keep this up heading into champs, I'm also gonna have my eyes on Toronto and am looking forward to seeing how they're able to bounce back.
Yeah, it should be interesting because um, Minnesota, this is it would be such a hard thing to follow it up because there are incredibly high expectations for them now at champs, right or wrong. Like, I mean, you have to think that they're at least, at the very least, a contender for the world championship now, and that's not something that we could really say before this event because to this point they had not shown any real consistency. So it should be really interesting in Toronto. It's going to be tough, but at the very least they can say that they got second. There are a lot of things that they can build off of. They did beat Optic twice, so that's something to look out for. And they were a map away from finishing out Minnesota. So at the very least, maybe a moral victory for them. But like you said, a really, really heartbreaking series for them. Let's talk about these bottom 4 teams, like the teams that aren't going to champs. As my camera decides to not focus on me, but these bottom 4 teams, because we're really just going to focus on the 8 teams attending champs on our next episode, which will be our champs preview episode. Let's talk about these teams that aren't going to be there, that are having an early off season. They can go on vacation a little earlier than Optic and Minnesota and Toronto and Dallas and all of them. So let's go with the bottom team, at least as far as COD Gamepedia says it. COD Gamepedia says that Paris is the last place team, which is a far fall for our Paris is winning champs crew. They went 8-22 on the season, which is a 27% win percentage in a series. And then their maps, they won 37% of their maps. They finished with 100 CDL points this season, which is pretty bad considering you get 10 points for just winning a match. So not a lot to really say for Paris, at least in the good department. They didn't get any points in this major. They only got 10 points in Stage 5 group play, got 10 points in Major 4, and got 10 points in Stage 4 group play as well. So, or 20 points in Stage 4 group play. So, not a lot in the back half of the season. What are your kind of lasting thoughts on Paris, and what do you think they should do moving forward?
Yeah, I think I'm looking for the tweet right now. I'm pretty sure I saw Crone post it though. I don't believe Paris placed in the money at a single major this year. Let me scroll real quick. Yeah, here it is. I'll put it in the doc in case you want to pull it up. Um, but yeah, they came in top 10 twice at stage 1 major and stage 4 major. And stage 2, 3, and 5, they came in last place. So I think it goes without saying that a complete rebuild is necessary here for Paris. I don't know what direction they'll go in. We saw in the inaugural season of the CDL, they had the Australian and European mixed roster. Now this year we saw European and North American mixed roster. I think the biggest I don't know how I want to word this. I think, heading into this year, they signed Fire, right? And a lot of people are excited to see Fire's debut. And it didn't necessarily plan out as some people expected. And Paris just decided to completely drop Fire. They didn't keep him under his contract, or, like they don't have an academy team, but I guess that's uh the way to say it. They released him from his contract and he was no longer a part of Paris. And I think that might have been a mistake in the sense that Paris is obviously at this point right now where they weren't competing to win championships, and Fire's a young player they could have potentially still kept under contract and tried to develop, maybe have an academy team next year that he's on or something, maybe even give him another shot in the pro league next year. But regardless, I think that was just a sign that completely releasing him and not keeping under his contract was a questionable move in my mind. But regardless of that, I just think at this point there needs to be a complete rebuild from Paris. We already saw even last year, just scrapping that previous roster, rebuilding one. This year, I expect the same thing to happen for Paris in this offseason. I don't know what direction they'll go in or who they'll target. But yeah, I guess time will tell.
Yeah, it's tough for Paris because they don't have the brand that someone like Optic or the Thieves or even the Empire can really provide. So, like, unless you're offering a ton of money, obviously, the thing about it is Paris is at an inherent disadvantage if if teams had gone and put their own headquarters in each of their host cities, and they had to practice or whatever or live there, they're at a disadvantage if the league begins to become more global and maybe goes the way of splitting the league into a conference. Like the Western Conference is the United States, and then the Eastern Conference is Europe or something along those lines, where you have 16 European teams, 16 United States teams. If that's the way it goes, Paris is at a disadvantage. At the current moment, they're still at a disadvantage because they don't have a very well-respected brand, and they've absolutely sucked for 2 seasons, which has not helped them at all. Even some of the teams that have Minnesota, for example, I mean, they don't have a particularly strong brand in the sense of they don't have these huge personalities that Scump is carrying up. Scump is essentially he kind of carried the Huntsman brand for that first season because Scump and Hex and the Optic guys, the real Optic guys, they kind of carry that because of their legacy. With the Thieves, it's the brand is the clothing and the streetwear kind of stuff that carries their brand. For Dallas, it's more of this winning culture, I guess, where they expect to win all the time, and Envy has a very strong presence in they have a strong track record with winning. Paris has none of this, and Paris is, I mean, they're owned by, I believe it's the ex Los Angeles Dodgers son owner, so I mean, there you go. There's not a recognizable figurehead for this team, for this, organization at all, and that really hurts them. And but it could be fixed if they got a good team. I'm not saying that they're going to recruit all of the money that they spent to get into this league, because I don't think that's the case for any of these teams, quite frankly. But especially for this kind of team, they just need to blow it up. Like, there's no point in keeping any of the players they have currently. I love Temp. Like, he's one of my favorite players. Like, when he turns on his personality, he has like this, like, he is larger than life in a sense, because he can make you laugh. He has like incredible skill and everything. And same with Scraps, like, when we've seen him, he is very funny and he has a great personality, but Paris doesn't put out any content to really complement that, and they don't really accentuate like the players' personalities on their team, which is unfortunate. And I've talked to Aqua before, and he seems like a really good guy, and he has had a lot of success. But just blow up this team. If Atlanta really wants to change the culture for this team, they have to go out and they have to get big players. Like, go out and spend money to get Octane on your team. Go out and spend money to get someone from FaZe or Slasher or somebody that could mold your roster into something worthwhile. But it's obviously not working in the current state, and I don't really know if Paris will be able to kind of change the reputation they have right now.
Yeah. To that point, real quick, I don't think we want to talk about them too much here. But like you kind of said, who wants to go to Paris at this point? Like, right? Like, could you, even if they get thrown the absolute bag, do you see Octane or Slasher, players like that, wanting to go to Paris? I don't know. Regardless, though, I think the big thing, one thing that they missed the boat on was Hydra. Like, simply put, like, if Paris was able to sign Hydra, who's very clearly the best French player in Call of Duty right now, they would at least have that to build around. And I can't imagine New York not wanting to at least try to re-sign him. That would be kind of mind-blowing to me. So I guess if Paris could somehow get Hydra and, build that French nationality, like national pride sense, whatever, however you want to word it, that would be cool. And, maybe another option for Paris is to go down that route. Like, we've seen French teams with like Whalers and Brezzy and those guys before in the past. Maybe that's something they decide to do and, try to build an identity as this French team. Obviously, that's all speculation. We won't know. But it's clear that both of us think a complete rebuild is necessary at this point.
Complete rebuild is probably necessary for LAG too. They finished in a tie for last place with Paris. They both had 100 CDL points. Like I said earlier in the show, LAG actually had the worst match win percentage. They went 8-26 on the season with a 24% win percentage and a 34% map win percentage, which was the worst of any team as well. So statistically, this is the worst team in the league. I mean, the veteran presence on this team is incredible. I mean, you have multiple ex-world champions. Apathy, Silly, and Assault were all on that Evil Geniuses team that won World War II champs. At the beginning of the season, they had Vivid, who most people agreed was the best player on LAG last year, and he deserved to, kind of have a team built around him. And then they benched him, midway through the season. Chino did help them, like he helps every team. He helps them with morale. He seems to kind of even them out when they're slumping, which is a very honorable thing to do. They bench him going into Stage 5, and then they go 0-6 in Stage 5 group play, and then the major combined. So obviously not anything good. I mean, it's just, I don't know, like, LAG, I guess, the thing is they require, I think, everybody lives in Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken, that are on LAG, which right now, like, that's kind of a disadvantage because most of the players in the league are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area because of online. If it goes back to LAN, I could see, because there are a ton of players from Southern California, like they either live out there or they're from there, like Slasher and like JCap was there, and like they have all of these people that are in the area or were in the area. Like, I'm pretty sure Kenny was also living out in LA. There is, like, and they do have like the destination thing where people would want to go live there if they were forced to. It's not like you're going to like Siberia or anything. Like people willingly move to LA all the time, so I think they have that going for them. But man, the I I don't know if like I think they would have to fire like some coaching staff because of the things that have been said about like the players not being involved in the decision making process. I think it would be really tough to convince any star player to come there if they can't have, any word into like who's going to be on the roster.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, I think aside from that, like player input aspect of it, I feel like the Gorillas is a more favorable destination than Paris at this point. With the Kroenke, I don't know if I said that right or not, but like with the Rams Stadium, they like have plans to build the like facility there. I think they might. I mean, obviously, like the guys are living there, so I think they have a facility to
They
like. I'm,
they
I'm
have
pretty
some
sure that
kind of facility, but I don't think it's
yeah,
a final thing.
yeah. That's what I'm like. They have the like the is it SoFi Stadium?
Yeah, SoFi Stadium, the new Ram Stadium in downtown LA.
Yeah, like I feel like I saw like they have plans to have some sort of like the esports facility built into that. Regardless, I think that's just more in my opinion at least. I think like you said, LA is a favorite like a place players will want to live or play for. And I think that's in a better situation than Paris. Like if me personally, if I was a pro player, aside from the player input with roster moves, regardless, just based off of do I want to play for the Gorillas or Legion? I think at this point I would rather go to the Gorillas. But similar to Paris, I think a complete rebuild is necessary here again. Unlike some of these other teams, they do have that academy team, which we mentioned, and I already mentioned earlier that I think it would be smart of the Gorillas to keep Mental uh, under contract and allow him to continue to develop at the academy level next year, see what he's able to do. But other than that, I think they need to just rebuild their main roster and go back to the drawing board. I did want to point out though, Crone was like tweeting for these bottom teams about their placings. The Gorillas had that top six placing at the stage one major. That was where they beat the Thieves in like the winners bracket. Um, and they got $20,000 there, but then they came in last place at stage two, top 10 at stage three, and last in last two majors. So they had $20,000 total earnings this season.
Yeah, I mean it's better than nothing, but it's also like a far cry from what a lot of these other teams have been able to do. I don't know, it's an interesting thing for LAG. I don't think they're in nearly as bad of a spot as some of these other teams because they're LA, and I mean I just think that is a pretty big advantage for most of these teams, or for like Thieves and Gorillas. Let's talk about these other two teams. Let's go with London next. They had a really difficult season just from like a roster standpoint, and like this is probably the most understandable bottom four out of any of them because they didn't get to see what they had in their original roster from the very beginning of the season, kind of like New York, but New York obviously like had someone like Hydra come in earlier than like Afro came in, but LA or London didn't get to play with Zero, and they didn't get that specific roster that they wanted. I believe Dominate, who is their coach, he wasn't able to even get into the United States until like stage four. So that's obviously tough when you're head coach. Obviously they had Shane. Shane was, I believe, was in the United States, so he was effectively the head coach, and he was working with them in the states. But they didn't get the things that they wanted originally, which is really tough. What do you think of London's season? What do you see them doing in the off season?
Yep. I think you summed it up pretty good there. Um, Regardless of poor results, they were consistently the team that was willing to make roster changes to try to improve and get into a better spot this season. Obviously, it didn't work out for them, but they showed that willingness to continually make roster moves, and I thought that was encouraging to see, regardless of the results. I kind of hit on it earlier in this episode. I think, unlike the other two teams we just talked about, I think London's best move here is to rebuild around Afro. Now, the question with that is, I also think Paul X has a lot of potential. He played really well, but we've already seen London in the past seemingly wants to have an all-European roster if possible, if the world, returns to a state where we're able to have lands again overseas. Obviously, that's just speculation. I don't really know. If they aren't going to have an all-European roster, then keeping Afro and Paul X and building around those two to try to add two more players for next season could be a move that we see. I know they had Nasty under contract in MW. I don't think they had him under contract for this season. He's another young player in the European scene who they could potentially target. But regardless, we could go on and on about what some of the European players they would potentially go after. But I think that's, unlike Gorillas in Paris, I don't think London wants to completely blow this up. I think they should try to rebuild around at least Afro, if not Afro and Paul X, if they decide to continue to have a European and North American roster.
Yeah, I kind of agree with London's standpoint, or what we're assuming their standpoint is regarding their roster. I mean, Paris, like you said, they very well may end up just fielding a French roster, and they would, automatically soak up some of that French support, because I don't know what, people in France really think, like the French Call of Duty scene. I don't know what they think of Paris right now, but I could see how it would be difficult to, kind of attach yourself to a team that doesn't really reflect who you are and what the scene that team is supposed to be located in. Like, it doesn't really reflect that. But London's done a really good job. Like, they almost all, like, until this season, obviously, they had no American players. They were all either Scottish, Irish, or English. Like, that's it. And that's who they stuck with. And I think that's a very valid strategy. If they can become like this really, really popular, like if we go to CDL London next year and the fans are going crazy for the Ravens, and like they can't get enough of this team, then it's an obvious success because they're popular in their home base. I think that's a very valid way to build your roster, especially if you're not confident that you can get Scump or, Shotzi or like these really big names that are going to like transform your franchise. Like, you might as well go with guys that are talented. London did really well last season at Champs, but they can stick with these English or these like, Northern European guys. So I think that's a good way to build their roster. I think they should continue doing that.
Side note, we haven't talked about expansion, and obviously that'll be a topic throughout the offseason.
Mm-hmm.
But just talking about the potential for a French team on Paris and a European team on London is making me miss the Vamos in the chat and hoping that if we have expansion, we get a Spanish team with Heretics and the Spanish guys.
It's not far off. Like, either Giants or Heretics getting that like Madrid spot or something would be really big, because Call of Duty needs to be international. It needs to reflect the international scene. Like, I would love if there's an Australian team, because Australian Call of Duty, like, as much as people like to meme it, but like, it's important. Like, we actually have a region set up for them, because there is like a big enough scene there to kind of reflect it. So if they had like a Melbourne or something, a franchise there, I think that would be awesome. Same for Germany, and I mean, Denmark has 2 CDL pros. Like, they might as well. Like, I don't know how great the Denmark scene is, but I mean, they might be able to do something there. Spain, obviously, Italy, because they would always send a team to champs. So I don't know, like the Italian scene. I know that what is his name? Swanee. He was on an Italian team for champs, I'm pretty sure, one year for like no reason essentially. But yeah, I would be down for as many expansion slots as they want because it makes it more interesting. I get to cover more teams. We'll obviously see some pretty bad teams if it expands too quickly, but I think that's a good idea. I would love to see some Vamos in the chat. And let's wrap it up with Seattle. We've talked a lot about them this episode because they were the only team in the bottom four that actually really did anything at the Stage 5 Major, but a really disappointing season. Not as disappointing as last year, I guess, because last year they probably won fewer games or fewer meaningful games. And at least on land, they performed relatively well. They got top 8 at the Stage 4 Major, which was the first land of the year, and then at the Stage 5 Major, they got top 6, which is really good. They beat FaZe. They're one of the only teams this season to beat FaZe, so that's not a feat that we can sell short. And while you were in the bathroom, I was talking about like the legitimacy of Seattle's claim that they should be at champs and that their performances at LAN should have helped them expand the field for champs. So what do you think about Seattle? Like we've talked a lot about Octane and how he's been like the hard carry for this team for the last 2 years. Do you see him sticking around and them doing again, trying to build another team around him?
Yeah, so this is to me the most interesting case of these bottom four teams, just because I honestly don't know what they're gonna do. I feel like it's gonna heavily revolve around what the individual players decide they want to do, instead of like the organization either saying like we want to keep this roster or we're gonna blow it up. Like if Octane gets an offer from like 100 Thieves, is just an example. I know it's been talked about or rumored. Don't know how likely that is or anything, but just an example. If Octane gets like an offer like that, I feel like he's gonna want to take that offer and leave, and then Seattle's gonna have to react to that. So I'm not really sure. I don't think Seattle keeps Octane and decides to build around him. Obviously, just these last 2 years, like it hasn't worked. I feel like they're gonna want to go in a different direction. I feel like he's gonna want to go in a different direction too. So I don't think we'll see Octane in a Seattle uniform next year, unless they just like throw the bag at him and he just like takes the money. Regardless. But I think Seattle is in a position where they've shown what they're capable of on LAN in these last 2 events, and we don't know what the format's going to look like next year. We don't even know what the game is going to look like next year yet. So they have time, and I don't really know what direction they're going to go in. But this is going to be a team that I have my eyes on in the offseason in particular, just because I think it's going to be one of those situations where it depends on what the individual players do more than like the organization like taking a stance and deciding to do A, B, or C.
Yeah, I think this is similar to like NBA free agency where the players they have the power and they can do what they want. If they want to team up with multiple star players, they can do that. So Seattle is just they don't really have a say in this, especially since Octane is presumably not under contract for next season. So it'll be interesting. But I think that Seattle, they proved something at the end of the season, and they deserve credit for performing well in LAN when those other bottom four teams didn't. So congrats to Seattle. I hope that whatever the roster looks like next season, they can actually have some success, because the fans that they do have, I'm sure, have been really heartbroken over the last 2 seasons, because that's a tough spot to be in, to be one of the worst teams back-to-back years. So yeah, that'll do it for our Stage 5 major recap and also a bottom 4 preview. We will do a more expansive preview about the top 8 teams, the teams that are actually going to be at champs. So we're not going to have a show next week. I will hopefully be faded on a beach in Myrtle Beach. That's my goal for next Tuesday night. Maybe I'll be faded in my hotel room watching like the Olympics or something. I don't know. But I will not be here next week. Bink is going to take the week off with me. Um, we are going to be back on Tuesday, August 17th, and at that time we will do our preview for champs for the final event of the year. We will break it down. We will break down who we think is going to win I believe it's a $2.5 million tournament. So a really big event to close out the year. The second ever CDL champs. So we will talk to you guys on Tuesday, August 17th. Make sure to like this video if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe or follow the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Make sure to give us 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. Bink is at jbink with 2Ks. I'm at Presbyers. And the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. Again, Tuesday, August 17th. We'll see you then. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Short and sweet this time. Thanks for tuning in, guys. And as always, remember to send the chow. Take it easy.